Welcome to our session, How Residential Campuses Are Using MOOCs to Enhance Campus Learning. Is everyone at the right place? All right, I'll make sure. All right, before we get going, I'm going to ask our panelists to introduce themselves. So we're going to do that first so you guys can know what's going to happen. Then we're going to talk about the goals of our session and how it's going to run. All right, so let's start with Julie.
Hey everybody, my name is Julie Goff. I am from Davidson College in North Carolina, and I lead all things MOOC at Davidson.
And Julie, what did you do before you made MOOCs?
Well, I'm a recovering attorney, so.
Okay.
Oh, hi, I guess I'm in this panel. I'm Mike Gallsberg from Dartmouth College. I help run our MOOC program, and I'm happy to figure out what the impact on our residential education is.
And what did you do before you made MOOCs?
Well, I'm sort of a recovering, well, let's just say I ran away with the circus when I was young.
All right, Mike
Traveled by train, lived a good life.
All right, Anna.
All right. I'm Anna Cruz. I'm the manager for MOOCs at Georgetown University. And before I did MOOCs, this is true, I was working at the Info Center at my college campus, my undergrad, and I answered questions like, how do you get rust stains out of shirts? And what time zone are we in?
Right.
Random things like that.
Great. Adam.
Adam Finkelstein from Mcgill, dealing with MOOCs and other things related. My job I did before,
For MOOCs.
many eons ago, I sold stunt kites on a beach.
Okay.
For a summer.
Eddie.
Hi everybody, I'm Eddie Maloney. I'm the Executive Director for our Center for New Designs and Learning and Scholarship at Georgetown. Also a faculty member there, and I'm now the founding program director of a new master's degree we're developing in learning and design.
And what did you do before you made MOOCs?
Cried, I don't know. Lots of things.
Lots of
I made soda machines once, the ones, the dispensers that you go to at McDonald's and so on. That was a dirty, disgusting job. I'll go with that.
All right, so I'm Josh Kim. I'm at Dartmouth, and before MOOCs, I worked at Dunkin' Donuts. All right, let's talk about our plan. So in the next hour or so, we're here to answer together a couple questions. Okay, and we're going to say that you guys are going to work, right, to answer these questions. Together, we're going to work. So the first question we're going to try to answer is, how will MOOCs enhance your residential teaching? And the second question is, the future of your MOOC program. Now, when I say you guys are going to work, that's actually true, and you'll see that in a bit. So I want to say that if anyone doesn't want to kind of do this with us, if anyone doesn't want to share, anyone doesn't want to work, fine. We're very happy if you leave. Don't worry about it. Just go. Okay?
See you, Mike. See you guys.
So we got the first one. Really, don't worry about that. All right, so to start us, Adam is going to start with a quick.
So we're just going to do a quick pulse, and because it's after lunch, it has to be physical. It can't just be hand raising or sitting down. So the first question is, I'm going to ask you a series of questions, and you sort of stand up if this is you. So if you're at the beginning of your MOOC project, like you haven't really done any yet, or you're just starting one, or you're in the process of one, stand up.
Before we
Yeah.
go, we're not looking at MOOCs per se, but more just how MOOC pedagogies can help us with online learning. I work at Johns Hopkins. My students aren't paying $50,000 a year to do MOOCs. They're going to be faced with. I'm working with the faculty for the residential undergraduates, so a little bit of an outlier.
Well,
That's why I answered.
You should definitely leave.
No problem. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Yes.
Yeah, I have another clarification question, which is, are we really talking MOOCs? I mean, if it's, are we talking, I'm making a MOOC for a course that's on campus, so personally I don't consider it to be a MOOC right? It's going to be relatively small in the world of MOOCs in terms of the population that's taking it. Does that count as a MOOC?
Yes, we can accommodate you and what we're going to do.
Yeah, so we can take MOOC, how about we say this, define MOOC however you'd like to define it, as you see fit. But are you at the beginning of that entire process? So anybody stand up if they're at the beginning? Okay. Okay, so the next group, you've done a few. You're in the middle. You're kind of like in the middle. Stay standing. Stay standing. You gotta stay standing. You're in the middle of your project. You're kind of like deep into it. You're like wrestling with the platforms. You're like hating life. Like that group. So people that are in the middle of their project. All right. Okay, keep going. All right. So then the next one is you're kind of nearing the end of the whole MOOC phenomenon. That might be the end of your money. That might be the end of the project. That might be the provost has lost interest. Whatever it is, you're kind of at the end and wondering, what am I supposed to do next? Now, you stand up. Okay, so that's almost, that's a good chunk. Now, the rest of you, why are you here, is the rest of you. But you guys, the rest of you could all stand up and then you can jump up and down. The rest of you that didn't fit into a category, you guys can just jump.
There you go.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Okay, good. Now we're warmed up, we're ready to go. You can actually probably stay standing because we're actually going to move you around in a second anyway. Don't get too comfortable. And you're not going to check your email here and all that stuff.
So I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. We're going to have a 10-minute discussion. The panelists are going to disperse amongst you. The panelists are going to form groups of 4 or 5. We're going to go out, and you guys are going to talk to each other and answer these 2 questions together. How will your MOOCs enhance your residential teaching, and what's your future of your MOOC program? So the panelists are going to disperse, and I'll bring you back together in about 10 minutes. Trust us, it'll be fun.
We need six to each panelist, so not counting you. So the 5 of us, we need 6 each. We should be okay.
Okay.
So the first 6 are with me. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, so hang right over here. It's not the greatest room for this, but
Good enough.
good. You can take a 7 and your whole hand.
I'll go with the next 6. All right, next 6. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Josh, where should I go?
We have 5. We got 6. And Josh, you can take an extra over here. We're only 5.
Anyone need a home?
Absolutely the worst stories. So the first question is how many things you want to do? Irrespective of what we're doing, what do you think you might be doing? What is the direction? So how does
If I was genuinely
How will, or how have, or how did work in court?
It's too many wonderful worlds, but it's sign up for our panel courses. Really, it's intended to be
No, mine is currently designed. I called and I knew the number. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, I mean, that's here what all of you Yeah, you want to say this is ice water packaging.
Brennan Tuttle.
Or do something about teaching quality that wasn't talking about.
One of the things we are very much researching is secondary.
It sounds like so many of us have this. Platform for
Is there blending online?
So, I mean, I'm not associated with any particular company that family loves opinion about technology. Some people
Is there a hope that we have that MOOCs will
no, yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why I just graduated and I was a huge fan about school. And yeah, our intention is to popularize this and actually save around the premise of how these people were otherwise unable to do.
Okay, 5 minutes. Should be on the second question. 5 minutes. 5 minutes. I want to.
But yeah, no, I'm here to serve.
So it's really good.
Yeah, no, I'm here.
Yeah.
She has videos that she made. I think
Get ourselves
and then hired them report some of your grades
So I've done very similar, I mean, I found like creating sort of more focused on
the range would be
all the way from
when
we did a couple
and so it's no sense that change.
Yeah.
The biggest thing that changed was that I just stuffed all the videos from up on YouTube. So it's just
Do you see that as
and in-person class, I think that's and just I wanted to.
How not actually teaching or engaging in a different way, whatever conversation
I think for me it was both. And I think also the other thing that I did was when I started thinking about how am I going to engage students in review or some of the, you know, I'd never done peer review. I've never really done peer review. It's a fairly theoretical course, I think it was math. I've never done peer review of homework assignments. And I incorporated that into the MOOC and then started to try it, you know, in our
I also have faculty members who don't meet as their class.
So that's sort of, so using that is actually already sort of triggers the second question that I asked about, right? You guys have
So we can actually make sure, I know you all actually using actual I know you did, but I still have that while we're going out of the class to now do something we have, you know, you have kind of put things on and it's not necessarily that Alfred sort of modern poetry, I knew that would be used too. So how do you get the next poetry, right? How do you find the rest of those experiences?
All right, time to come back. Time to come back. Wrap it up. Wrap it up. You guys wrap it up. Okay, so I'm glad you guys all had a good discussion. I hope you guys learned a lot from each other. So what we're going to do now is that the panelists at the 4 institutions are going to go through and try to answer the same questions that you guys answered, but also try to synthesize kind of what they heard and kind of integrate kind of on the fly what they learned from you with what's going on at their institutions. So our first panelist is Adam from McGill.
Great, thank you. Okay, so McGill got into MOOCs, I think for a lot of reasons that are very common among all of you and all of the other panelists. I mean, one is we wanted to be involved with or be part of the club where everybody else is. So this is one thing. That, there are a lot of people doing interesting things and there was something happening and we wanted to be part of it. Second is that, it's very, very rare that education gets an opportunity to have a lab. And in fact, we don't really ever have an opportunity for a lab. And we very rarely are able to experiment on our courses and our students because they're trying to get credit and graduate and learn and all the sort of things. Whereas with the idea around MOOCs is that, well, we could screw around and try something. We're not beholden to the students per se. We could try a totally different method of doing X or Y and see what happens. So there's an experimentation and a research part of that. We wanted to obviously build the brand and keep the brand moving as everybody does. We wanted to sort of figure out a bit more about how we could use all of this thing that we're developing in MOOCs for online residential education. Because we are a brick and mortar campus, we will always be a brick and mortar campus. Our undergraduate programs are not turning into online programs, there's no push to do so. We do have online graduate programs that are moving in that direction, but we are an experience that is a lived experience on the ground. But that doesn't mean that we don't want students to have some sort of digital experience along with the experience in the lab, in the class, in the field. So we're trying to figure out how to navigate that. So in the process of doing that, we basically made 5. These are the first 4, there's one more in development. Food for thought, the body matters and exercise, natural disasters course, which is like a disaster a week on the science of disasters, and our social learning for social impact course. All of these have had some really interesting impacts in the MOOC world with the students, obviously thousands of students, really interesting discussions. Just to tap into 2 or 3, we had, in Food for Thought, there was a month-and-a-half-long argument between a TA and a Saskatchewan rural farmer about GMO foods. It was great. It was amazing to watch and amazing to see develop. The body matters. We had a lot of really interesting discussions about pregnancy and fitness and all sorts of things that happened all throughout the course. All of these are designed as full 10 weeks, residential-style online courses. Natural disasters, the idea of the disaster a week and then tapping into the students. So students that experienced disasters and bringing that into the curriculum that was in the course. And the social learning for social impact, really empowering people to sort of take command of their local communities, organize and do something with social impact. And from that course, one of the groups that formed, we were the sort of the first to use the Teams tool, which is a totally interesting experience. I'm happy to tell you about that in edX. And here they actually built a school in Syria. As a result of that course. So there's lots of interesting impact that came of that, and our next one is on demography. But I think through the whole process we learned a lot of really interesting things about how learning can be done online in different ways, and each one of these we tried to do something unique and different to try different experiments as part of that. So when I hit the next one. So just to give you an example of one of the ways that it impacted our residential campus. So the natural disasters course, in fact actually 2 of those that you saw, the Food for Thought and natural disasters, started out and have been and continue to be on campus, on ground courses. Natural disasters is an amazing course that started out as a 100-person class about 8 years ago and ballooned so quickly, so fast that it filled our largest room at 600, and it's always jammed. You have to really, really try to get into this course. It actually has some of the best instructors in the university. They do no multiple choice exams. It's project-based, it's midterms, finals, handwritten. They do all the grading, and these guys are incredible. What we did was they said, okay, what can we use the MOOC content for? What can we do with the MOOC content to enhance the on-ground residential campus? So what we did was we took 25% of the course and flipped it. So the students were actually, these 600 students on campus, actually used the MOOC content as part of the lecture material and the practice and the quizzes and all the stuff that we were doing online, the discussions. And they took out one of the midterms that they would normally do and did a group project. So if you can imagine, we had 600 students over a period of 4 weeks doing a group conference inside our largest lecture hall on campus. So this was a really interesting example of taking the MOOC material directly, flipping a large class, and if anybody's involved in flipped instruction, flipping a large class doesn't save you much, and it's really hard to deal with, because once you flip a class of 600 students, where the hell are you going to put 600 students, and how many instructors do you need to do to actually get it to something small group? So in this case, we did it as a big conference, and it worked out really well. So the next question, or the last question is, what's the future? I mean, one of the things about our MOOC projects is looking at building the brand and sustaining the brand. This is less of an issue going through in the future. We've done this, we did the project, we had a whole bunch of thousands of learners doing thousands of things. We had some impact on our campus. But sort of what's next? Do we want to continue that brand by, let's say, tapping into our researchers? So our researchers are desperate to get what they're doing out to the rest of the world. Maybe we use mini MOOCs as an idea of tapping into our researchers and seeing, here's what's going on in neuroscience, and having a little 4-week neuroscience MOOC. It's a lot more interesting than just a 45-minute talk. Researchers could actually engage with people all across the world in what they're doing. So try to leverage the brand in that way. The other thing that's important to think about is the research. So this has been one of the most difficult things that we've been trying to deal with. I've got lots of interesting analogies about MOOC research, but it's sort of the idea of a dump truck being backed up onto your lawn and dumped out in the front of your lawn and said, here's all your data, good luck. So we spent quite a long time trying to sift through it and figure out what's useful, but there really is some interesting information here. And if we think about it in terms of research at the university, there are hundreds of theses for students that could be used in this for the next few years to come, even with just the data we have right now. In terms of changes, this is where the question of what can we do to pivot? Like, can we use a lot of the experience we've gained from doing this? We know how difficult it is to make an online course start to finish. We know the hours it takes. We know cost it takes. We know the type of faculty that we want to work with. So this kind of MOOC experiences has given all of that information to us and that experience so that we can say, all right, let's attack a first-year science curriculum, as an example. I mean, what was brought up in our discussions a lot in the sort of the future, one of them was the idea of using MOOCs for professional development, but also the idea of MOOCs as faculty development. Now, on the one hand, MOOCs are probably the most expensive faculty development initiative in the history of education. But on the other hand, it has had a many deep impact on faculty members. And one of the nice things about that is that they spread the word about online teaching, not just MOOCs. And a great example of that happened to us. So the instructor that taught that food for thought class, originally when he started the project thought that, well, we'll just take the recordings of our in-class and stick it online. That'll be the MOOC, right? And we said, no, we start from scratch. He said, what? But once going through that, this is an instructor, a senior instructor who's completely 360'd and is now in Senate and other places demanding that the university require all courses to have online discussion groups. And that all courses should have students talking online. And this was an amazing turnaround. And we can't discount the power that some of the individuals that get involved in these projects have on campus and the ripple effect that can happen. So on the one hand, it is the most expensive faculty development initiative in history. On the other hand, it may be actually one of the most effective faculty development initiatives in history. So I think I'll stop there and pass it on to the next.
Great, and just to let you know, please write down your questions. We're going to get through all 4 institutions, and then you guys are going to have a chance to argue and ask provocative questions to all the panelists. All right, so next we have Julia Davidson.
Thanks, Josh. Josh wanted me to walk around, but I think I'm just going to stay here between my notes, if that's okay. So I'm Julie Goff. I'm at Davidson College in North Carolina, and we actually joined the edX Consortium in 2013. And we've had kind of 2 concurrent projects going on. One is sort of taking a lot of our residential courses. We have about 5 of them so far that have been adapted to the MOOC format. And then Davidson Next, if you haven't heard of that, that's actually a separate project that we have with the College Board and putting MOOCs on edX for high school students. So in terms of what we have learned when we are working on MOOCs at Davidson, very similar to the themes that I heard from my colleagues at UPenn and Cornell up there in the back of the room. They have served most certainly as a catalyst for change for our campuses. So just by virtue of saying we are going to build the first MOOC on our campus, we have now built infrastructure, capacity, new mentalities on our campus that are really going to help drive digital innovation in all manner of places. So I think that has definitely been true for Davidson. We now actually have a Center for Digital Learning Research and Design, and that probably would never have happened at a school of our size had we not embarked on the MOOC experiment. And similar to Mcgill, we joined edX because I like to say there's a little bit of FOMO going on, right? Like we all want to be in the game, but I think to put a little bit of a better spin on that, it's also we want a seat at the table, right? Like we want to be part of this conversation. We don't just want to hear 3 years from now, what is a MOOC and what's the benefit or the reasons not to do it. We want to be in the game and have a part of that conversation. Also similar to Gil at Davidson, an incredible opportunity for faculty development. Our faculty talked about how it created for them these professional networks and relationships that they wouldn't otherwise have had they not created the MOOC. So again, it's an expensive way to create those types of things, but it deserves to be mentioned. Another thing that we discovered at Davidson were sort of some contradictions surfaced when we did some post surveys with MOOCs that were also used with the residential courses that they were extracted from. So the same faculty who developed the MOOC also taught the course residentially at the same time, and students were required to be learners in the MOOC so they could kind of have the hybrid experience. So there was this implicit bias going in that the MOOCs they're online, they're lesser quality, they're therefore going to be less effective. But a couple interesting things emerged from that. We actually had an HIV/AIDS course as one of our MOOCs at Davidson. And so it was co-taught by an English professor and a biology professor. So the English professor was sort of looking at the stigmas that are in literature, art, that sort of thing for people who are living with HIV and AIDS. The biologist described what's actually happening in the body with someone who's living with this condition. And so there were learners in the MOOC who were living in communities in Africa where they're living with HIV and AIDS. So their voices being in that MOOC and our residential students getting able to connect with them real time. I mean, you can imagine the power of something like that. That never would have happened on our little campus in North Carolina with 1,800 students. So that was pretty cool. We also had a medicinal chemistry course that was run as a hybrid experience for our residential students. And afterwards, those students said the self-directed portions of their learning were more efficient by using the MOOC platform and experience than other ways of doing similar problems, et cetera. And even though that wasn't necessarily the MOOC platform itself, it did show the power that can be had by using blended learning, other online platforms, that sort of thing. So I think that, did I miss anything from my colleagues over there? Two examples just to point out other ways that it benefits residential that Davidson doesn't have because we don't have any professional schools. But the Wharton folks said that their MOOCs serve as an alternate way to get prerequisite courses if they're applying for a certain program or internship, their So it's entrepreneurship.
pretty, it's very limited. We haven't really started experimenting it, but every now and then we get a call from a program within the Wharton School saying, is it okay if we enroll some of our students who want to be a part of this particular program they're applying, and can they take part, can they take this course? So we haven't had much experience with that yet. It's still new just because we're still growing and building, but it is out there. It's a resource that the faculty can use and can turn to now, and it wasn't there before.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And one other thing that both UPenn and Cornell mentioned is that they're trying right now to catalog all of the MOOC content. So if you've been doing MOOC programs for a while, you've accumulated a lot of content. So how can you maybe break that up into chunks that the rest of your faculty can use, but you don't have to actually use the full MOOC? And they're talking about doing that through their library on campus. So if we go to the next slide. In terms of the future of MOOCs, I said Davidson has been involved since 2013, so we kind of have gone through the first cycle of creating MOOCs, trying to figure out what's next. And we are, I can't say we're going full steam ahead like UPenn. They described that they had sort of a fully funded model, something that works really well. That's not necessarily the case for every school. So with Davidson, we want to be a little bit more strategic in the MOOC projects that we do partake in. So just to give you two examples. One, we are starting in on a new series where we're actually creating 2-week MOOCs around hot topics or current events. So to give you an example, Davidson is really close to the city of Charlotte where some racial tensions and riots just happened. And so we've talked a lot about what would it look like for us to create a 2-week MOOC. In a matter of 3 weeks, we would create a 2-week MOOC that would contextualize what just happened in Charlotte. So an event can literally happen and then 3 weeks later we can have a MOOC helping learners to learn a little bit more about that or the context that led to it. So we're embarking on that experiment this fall, and then we are also working on some other strategic projects around professional development, which will help with some revenue opportunities, which Wharton has plenty of those, but trying to use the strengths that we have at Davidson to make sure that if we do create a MOOC, that there is going to be an audience, that there's going to be hopefully a revenue opportunity, and that revenue, not that we're looking to get rich, but what it does is it sustains the program and allows us to experiment more. So yeah, my colleagues from Cornell and UPenn, you guys are, Wharton is in a wonderful position to keep producing MOOCs and have a lot of traffic there.
There's Penn too.
Yes, there's Penn, sorry. And you described, yeah, I'm butchering all this. So Penn described how you guys are trying to adapt the business school model to other professional schools for potential revenue.
Yeah, I think we're expanding that up, like using specializations that they've sort of delved into in professional education. I think other schools are seeing that is a success, and
Right.
It can apply to a lot more fields.
Yep.
So we're having other schools explore that.
Yeah. And then Cornell talked a little bit about trying to come up with a future vision for your MOOCs, and then also using it residentially for students who may need additional supports coming in from making the transition from high school to college, and using MOOCs in a way that are benefiting students on campus. And I'm sorry, I had to process a lot of information in a short amount of time, so if I missed anything, please feel free to jump in. Okay, thanks. That's it.
That's it? All right, thank you, Julie. All right, next we have Mike from Dartmouth.
I had a great group, and they came up with some interesting things about the impacts on residential teaching. For instance, if you're at ASU or any other research institution, it's connecting education practitioners in the classroom and educational researchers. This might sound simple, but it's really moving mountains at a research institution. In Hong Kong, they've used MOOCs as marketing, and they've really internationalized their presence. It's also led to new tech, which has been used in MOOCs and then with their students. And it's also raised the dialogue about teaching, which again at a research institution is difficult to do. So that's had impact already. And it's also blending online and residential. So they're experimenting with programs that are partially online, and then they come to campus, and the students come to campus. Georgia Tech, who at least in this room is going to claim to be the first one to offer a MOOC. We can fight about that later. But they've been doing this since way back in 2011. I think that's important because thinking about impacts on different time scales, and they had a number of things to mention, notably the computer science masters offered through Udacity for seven grand. There were no online undergraduate courses offered before they did MOOCs, and it's also led to Learning Analytics data project to understand not just MOOC learners, but their learners on campus. And if you've ever taken a Harvard MOOC, you may be participating in some A/B testing, which is figuring out lessons that then make it onto the residential classes. So those are just a few from our team. At Dartmouth, as some people here mentioned, we often talk about porting content between MOOC and residential class, so the flipping model. And there's a little bit of that, but it does offer opportunities to even flip courses that the professor themselves has not taught. So an earth science professor said, you know, I want to record a video on hydroelectricity. And I said, well, your earth science colleague down the hall did a really nice one at the hydro dam down the river. What if you show your students that? And he said, well, I do it a little differently. I said, perfect. Then ask your students what the difference between environmental science and earth science is. It also gives an opportunity for students to be teachers. So we see up there Chloe and Joby at their laptops with their professor Andy Friedland behind them. They're TAs in the course. They've taken the residential version and they've deepened their knowledge by becoming teachers in the MOOC space. It also spurs new residential classes. So we had a 19th century American Lit MOOC that looked at the role of the Dartmouth campus and community in some of the 19th century American authors, and that led to a new course on campus. It was also really popular among our alumni because it sort of connected them back to the history of campus. And I think that spurs us to think differently about who our learners are. They're not just our students on campus. And probably one of the biggest impacts, and one that's an investment that we'll see the returns on, is building capacity. So having learning teams like media educators and instructional design educators working with faculty to produce courses. That's really a new model of working, and it can be used not just on MOOCs, but for redesigning large lecture classes to feel more like small seminars. So what's the future? I love talking about the future because you can never be wrong in the moment. We'll have to wait and see. We're experimenting with shorter courses and shorter projects. Talking to Julie Goff at lunch, she calls those pop-up MOOCs. I don't think that's trademarked yet, so we're going to steal it.
We can fight about it later.
Okay. Building partnerships with other institutions. So like maybe if you're early on in your MOOC project, it's just enough to like keep the wheels on the bus to get the first couple courses up. But now that we've done 4, we can think about how we can partner with other institutions, and we're doing that with Wits University in South Africa and some other institutions. MOOCs also allow other projects to have a greater reach. So new institutes, grant projects, experiential learning projects. Just a couple of examples. Last week, we had a new Institute for Cross-Disciplinary Engagement launched. So it brings STEM scholars and humanities scholars together to work on issues in scholarship. And that's, part of that work, they're offering 2 MOOCs, one called Question Reality, and the other asking if we have free will. You'll be interested in the answer to that question. This December, some Dartmouth students who are examining the fossil record of early hominids in South Africa will be teaching in what will become a MOOC next year. And finally, it becomes a way for us to talk about new programs. So if we're thinking about new disciplines, new masters, we can talk about micromasters. So it's entered our conversations around campus. That's it.
Great, thank you, Mike. All right, next we have Eddie from Georgetown.
All right, so great conversation in our group, talked about a lot of similar things. I think building capacity, an important part of why various folks are getting involved in MOOCs, thinking about how flipping the classroom capacities will be affected by how we do MOOC work, as well as some of the tools and how those tools potentially translate into the on-campus experience. I thought it was a kind of an interesting spectrum of kind of approaches, or at least status of where people are in thinking about the MOOCs. And I guess hearing all of the kind of report outs that everyone is in this, some version of it's a twinkle in the eye, which I thought was a great phrase, to, you know, we're just fully invested and moving forward pretty significantly. I thought one of the things that's interesting to me, and then I'll talk a little bit about Georgetown, is that I think the group of people on the panel in many ways started very early and are getting to a point of wondering if we're too jaded now. And that's an interesting space to have this conversation, where a lot of the folks that I've been talking to and part of these conversations, I think, are really still very much invested in this. And so I'm kind of being interested in the Q&A, how we kind of balance that notion of what is the tension that we're feeling after having been doing it for a while. Georgetown was one of the first 4 schools to sign up with edX, not counting Harvard and MIT. So we got involved very early on, and you know, now we're at a point where it's like, well, are we learning? Are we doing what we think we should be doing in this space? And is this the right space for us to be in? Not with an answer that says no, but certainly that's an open question that we're working on. So we started our MOOC program. We got 4 things up there. Josh wouldn't let us use a lot of words, so we tried to keep them very, very limited to mission, campus, partners, and capacity. Though, as I'm hearing what all my colleagues were saying, we got involved for all of those reasons as well. But really, at the end of the day, the reason why we got involved in MOOCs is because our president told us to, which I think is a really interesting moment, and it's kind of an inflection point in time in higher ed, when our president says to us, you need to get involved, campus, the university needs to get involved in a teaching and learning tool, right? We now have to invest in something, never happened before. Blackboard, course management systems, infrastructure technology, all of those other things, president not connected to, not involved in, not a part of those decisions. It's just after the UVA stuff, it was just after, you know, some of the concern and some of the anxiety, and he really felt like, you know, there's a train that's moving and we gotta be on it. We don't know where it's gonna stop, we don't know when we're gonna get off, we don't know where it's going, right, but we need to be on it to figure out what's happening. Which to me was a great tension at that time, to start thinking about senior leadership all of a sudden thinking teaching and learning is really important, right? And we need to pay attention to it in a way, give some care to it in a way that maybe we haven't been giving care to it. And I've gone to now over the past 3 and 4 years, so many different seminars where a variety of folks from research institutions primarily have been giving kind of care to this notion of teaching and learning in ways that hadn't happened in the decades before, which I find fascinating, encouraging, exciting, and probably one of the greatest influences of MOOCs in many ways. It created a moment in time where we all had to respond to it, and we responded in a variety of different ways. And we thought it was important that we carried out Georgetown is a Jesuit institution, and then we carried out the Jesuit mission of reaching populations of students who could not come to Georgetown, would never be able to come to Georgetown, but we would gain access to them and so on. The idea of branding was important, being part of a conversation, being part of a community was crucial as well. We knew, even after the kind of edict, and I'm being a little bit harsh. It wasn't that in any way. It was really more of an opening of a conversation. Should we be doing this by our president? Is this a space that we should be getting involved in? And a really nice full review. But even with that, we lobbied hard, my office, some of my colleagues, to make sure that we were investing just as heavily on campus. So when we got involved in the MOOC kind of experiments, if you want to call it that, or the MOOC process, whatever you want to think about it as, we created a kind of full investment that was both the MOOCs and on-campus experimentation, which we call the Initiative on Technology Enhanced Learning. It was an $8 million investment on campus. For Georgetown, that was a major investment of funding, again, into the teaching and learning space. And in parallel with the MOOC development, we've done about 19 courses and iterations at this point in time. We have launched at various scales 162 different projects on campus. With faculty members, 233 different faculty members, all funded projects, some really small, some really large, some single course, some cross course, some curricular experimentation. And we saw both of those things as being incredibly important to do at the same time. Rather than saying we're just jumping on this train, we think we want to be part of thinking really carefully about how this moment in time is going to change the experience on campus. And that's happened in a variety of ways. I'll talk about that in a second. But the kind of, the other kind of impetuses for this impulse is partners. This group right here, right, this conference, the people on this panel, we've formed partnerships in a variety of ways over the past few years that I think are an incredible outcome of the MOOC experience as well. I've said in a number of conferences that I think the kind of disruption narrative that was so dominant in 2012, in part because of MOOCs and in part because of the value proposition of higher education, never happened and never was going to happen for a variety of reasons, which I'm happy to talk about. But I think the biggest reason is that unlike newspaper industry, unlike the steel industry, the shipping industry, and all of the other disrupted industries, universities talk to each other, colleges speak to each other. We work together in ways that no one else does. We're not a silo that's trying to build our own image, our own funding, our own resources and revenue and so on. We all kind of work together toward a set of shared purposes, forming students, building knowledge, and contributing to the common good. And that's something that I think differentiates us in that kind of disruptive narrative, and I think this is an example of that. So we don't have the data, right? We don't have the research. We don't have all of the things that we thought we were going to have that were part of that partnership. But we have a community, and it's a community that continues to grow, and it creates a kind of depth, right? And then building capacity, it was certainly important for us. We felt like throughout the kind of initial investment in this space that we always had the capability to do this work and to challenge what MOOCs were. We built parallel platforms. We've done, I think, a lot of really interesting things in the MOOC space and in the online space. We just never had the capacity to do it at scale. And one of the things that getting involved in this and making that investment allowed us to do was to build up, not significantly, but to build up enough of an internal capacity to continue to do this work, again, not just for MOOCs, but for on-campus work. So I think I've kind of talked about how most of those things have happened. I mean, the mission, our brand, certainly we feel that the kind of global extension of the Georgetown brand has been part of this. We've had I do believe we feel like we've been able to experiment in really great ways, both in the MOOC space, and that's had an impact on the work that we're doing on campus. I will say we don't feel like, again, that institutions of higher ed are going away. There are going to be 10 of them in 50 years. I mean, we feel pretty strongly that there's a value proposition there that's incredibly important. So the kind of initial disruption, anxiety that the sky is falling, was not something that drove a lot of our kind of investment in this, but it's certainly the case that it allowed us to feel like if that was going to happen, or if it did happen, we would have been on a train out of town, I suppose. And then the partnerships I just talked about and the capacity and so on. So where are we going? Next slide. We started to get abstract. I'm not sure I even know what these mean at this point, but
it's my fault.
Anna put them together, and I'm incredibly beholden to her for doing so. We're doing a couple of things with MOOCs as we kind of move forward. As I said, early on, a lot of experimentation, a lot of research gathering, developing concurrent platforms, tools that we thought would work well to invest in things like reflection. We heard this morning. How that might not be happening in MOOCs. We actually think we have a really good way of doing that and getting students involved in what it means to do a reflection in that kind of online space at scale. But then for us, it's about how we take that work that's happening there and bring it back to campus. So we've got some courses that are experimenting with a 4th credit option, for example. We're on generally a 3 credit per course model, except for some community-based learning activities. So they're actually going to be using the 4th credit for students to take the MOOC and then to kind of flip the classroom, but also extend the classroom. Right? We also, kind of in the MicroMasters vein, but not necessarily like MicroMasters, we're doing some pretty semester prep courses where students are actually taking the MOOC before coming into the course. So again, not quite flipping the classroom, but certainly shifting the conversation, or shifting the time of the classroom. And then developing a few new platforms and continuing to move those out. And so what's next for us? So seeking insights, just continuing to be part of this conversation is really important to us. We feel pretty good that even though the revenue notion of MOOCs never panned out, and I think for many of us, we didn't expect it to pan out in a particular kind of way, but we all know, and as Adam said, incredibly expensive investment when we were first calculating our costs. When you count kind of investments in the projects, as well as investments in the community and so on, they were insanely expensive courses to build that you were then just giving away for free. One of the things that we've been working really hard to do over the past 3 or 4 years, is reduce our costs, and we did that in half in the first 2 years, and then a half again since that point. So we feel pretty good about the kind of downward arc of costs in order to develop this. Even though the revenue's not coming in, feel a little bit better about what the cost proposition is. And then, continued kind of cross-pollination between our online programs. We do have degree programs and certificate programs that are for fee, and how those are being impacted by MOOCs. So the MicroMasters is one potential possibility there, but we do other work as well that brings those two things together.
All right, great. All right, so the next part of our time, the last few minutes we have together, is your guys' chance to ask these 4 schools anything you want. Nothing is off limits.
The more controversial, the more Josh will be happy.
And I'm going to try to make sure we distribute the conversation. So let's see, and we'll start here.
Yeah, I've heard several of the speakers mention experimentation and taking stuff that you learned and moving it back into your residential campus. As someone who's looked at a bunch of MOOCs, seen them rerun, the most I've ever really seen is they cut the MOOCs into pieces to make them smaller, but the content's pretty much all the same. Is any of those lessons learned or experimentations going back into the MOOCs that you actually currently have on and making updates to those courses? Because as you say, they're expensive to make, so that I understand why once the course is finished, you wouldn't necessarily go and spend more money on it.
Who are you asking?
Anybody who's...
Yeah, well, one of the things I will say, I really don't mean this to be snarky, because I love everybody at edX, which is our partner in the MOOC space, and they've been great partners in a lot of ways, but the platform has never necessarily been what we had hoped it would be. And a lot of the experimentation has been trying to figure out how to take advantage of that platform and do it in a way that we think is going to be effective, right? And so it's not just, are you experimenting with the length of a video or experimenting with how a course is laid out, but what are the tools that you're working with, and how can you be most effective with those tools?
We've definitely done updates and tweaks to every iteration that we do, and we use it as an opportunity to see like what's worked, what would we want to try, is there anything different we want to try this time, what can we do to redevelop it. A great example with the disasters is that we're planning to reoffer it, say, next fall. And the thinking of shifting the timing, because we had always actually had the on-campus course first, and then in the January we started the MOOC one, and so they would be offset. And so we thought, we pitched it to the faculty and said, okay, ground up, let's redesign the whole idea. What if we actually reintegrated online and the MOOC courses simultaneously running? What could we do? And so we started mapping out a series of brainstorming activities to think, well, all right, now that you've opened up the classroom to the world, what could we do with that? And then that kind of discussion is the interesting part that cascades from there. So we have a year to figure that out.
Yeah. So at Dartmouth, we've, in reoffering courses, we've experimented with release cycles. So usually in the first time you offer the course, we're just not ahead of enough of production schedule to do more than a week at a time. But once you offer it a second time, experiment with 2 chunks or maybe all at once. Also, making the videos open, since there's an instance on YouTube, just publishing that on a page so that people can search the terms relevant to that video and don't have to log in through edX. We kind of lose the data on them then, other than YouTube analytics. But
All right, great question. We had another question over here.
Do you mind if I just add one thing? Because it's relevant. I'm a research scientist at Harvard, and one thing I've done with other people is develop tools that let you experiment more easily. So they won't change your whole course, but if you Google like MOOCs, it's basically a tool that plugs into edX and will let you run experiments and compare different explanations and quizzes, and then dynamically face it in. So even if you don't have much time the first time around, you stick it in, and when you get a chance, you add in, okay, here's another explanation, here's another motivation message. And as data is being collected, it'll kind of automatically phase it in. So if that's something that'd be useful to you, feel free to reach out or Google like MOOCs, and it'll point you to some links that are not complete, but you can follow up.
Great, thank you.
I'm curious how...
Can you say who you are? Sorry.
Sure, my name is Eve, and I'm from Brown University. We just signed with edX about a month ago, so we've had a prior experiment without too much of a long-term strategy associated with Coursera, so we're really starting anew with this. And I'm curious about the short-term MOOC idea that you have and how you're sort of challenging the infrastructure of the community building component within the platform to support what could be a much more potentially intense, dynamic, immediate conversation that's going to happen around those world event discussions that you're going to be having.
Yeah. When you say community, do you mean like the faculty who will help build it?
No, I mean the actual discussion that's
Oh.
going to be happening in conjunction with the MOOC. So are you doing anything new within the discussion?
Yeah, I think we want to, but I think we're definitely being ambitious with the production timeline. As many of you know who have done MOOCs, like a 3-week production time frame for anything is crazy ambitious. So I think that's definitely one of our goals is how can we be agile with content and not take a MOOC to get something out. But I think in terms of the engagement, I think that's something that we're going to really have to experiment with. We have been looking at a few tools like Shindig, where we can hold sort of live events and invite people in. I mean, certainly trying to use channels like social media and whatnot to sort of keep the conversation alive and going. But yeah, I think we'll use traditional things like the discussion forum and then try to enhance from there.
Okay. Great.
I want to go over here. I'm just curious, any questions over here? No? All right, we had a question over here.
Now I'm gonna cough. Jenny Kay from Rowan University in South Jersey. I hear an awful lot about when everybody's talking about their MOOCs, they're talking about, what next time we start it and it will run for this long, or maybe we'll dole it out differently. Is anybody experimenting with asynchronous MOOCs and kind of leaving them up? And what are your thoughts on that? How does that differ and how does that work?
we've left all of our MOOCs open, so you can still go and enroll in them and sort of move through them self-paced. Our engineering MOOC, which is about structures and bridges and things like that, sort of asking you to explore your world and build some simple structures at home with spaghetti and marshmallows and stuff like that, continues to see action. And there's sort of these events that we haven't quite made meaning of, but there's like these bumps in enrollment where people will jump in and start again. So
I can also give you a hint, at least from my own MOOC that is asynchronous. One of the bumps that I've seen personally is it sure as heck looks like a class is taking it together, right? That you get a group of people that seem to all be in the same region or whatever.
I mean, we've done the opposite, so we've not opened them after they're done. Specifically because, and I don't mean this in a facetious way or anything, that like an asynchronous MOOC is like a website. So the idea for us was that these were courses designed around interactivity and discussions and things that had to happen where there were people involved. And because of that, we didn't want to open it up and leave it open because it gave a real misrepresentation for us of what that course was about. It was just sort of like almost like you go through like at the end of a game and like there's stuff on the ground. You're like something happened here. It must have been really interesting, but I missed it. And so we structured our courses that way. If you don't structure them out, you structure them differently, then it's fine. But I think you definitely need to have that opportunity to say, no, this is meant as a running course to have people interact. And when it's done, it's finished, and we're done for that time. And we're gonna, the people who took it can still archive it, access the archive, but not if you haven't taken it, you can't get in. That's okay.
We've also done a kind of middle ground where we've also let our courses open, but we've just taken a course and intentionally made it self-paced. So it's iteration, now it's launching as a self-paced course. So it started in that context, and then we revised it, spent quite a bit of time, Anna spent quite a bit of time revising that course to the faculty members and the TAs, so it could be run without kind of that intervention. And in part, that's the cost model as well. Our faculty, for a variety of reasons, want to be paid when they're working, so you have to actually decide how much you're going to be able to continue iterations of courses. If you have to continue to pay people at significant amounts of money teaching them.
Say who you are. Where you're from.
Rob Vanderland from Cornell. I'm curious if any of you have sort of negotiated this challenge, trying to control costs, trying to create experiences that keep as many learners involved as possible has meant that our MOOCs have become progressively shorter. We generally do 4 to 5 week MOOCs now, but we at the same time want to integrate them into on-campus residential courses. Often they started as residential courses, but now they've been compressed to 5 weeks. So how do you actually map that back into the classroom to do it, to effectively flip the classroom?
Julie, you want to?
I don't know if we have any examples of that.
Okay, anyone else want to?
I mean, the one that we did the flip was almost a mirror. So it's hard to sort of compare that. I mean, I think that, again, we didn't flip the whole course. And in fact, actually, one of the things we did check with the students, we looked at this after the experiment, we went, did it and did surveys with the students, and the students didn't want the whole thing flipped. They actually felt that, like 25%, 40, 50, that was it, that was enough. Like they wanted to have the in-class, even if the in-class lecture was very similar to what was online, they wanted the in-class experience. So we don't have an example, but I think that says that you can do 25% of it and still flip pieces. You don't really get the economy of scale that a flip is supposed to give, where, suddenly you don't need the 600-person room because everything's flipped. That just doesn't happen. So there's no real economy of scale with flipping, and there's no savings of money, but it does give an alternative kind of mechanism to do different things in the classroom, which you could just pick and choose bits and pieces of the course and not need the whole thing.
Okay, one more question, and we'll wrap it up and give time for people to talk to your panelists. One more question? All right, let's thank the panelists for these guys will stick around if you want to come and chat with them afterwards.